At least name those pathway.
Dorsal column pathway.
Okay, dorsal column pathway, which consists of fasciculus crossalis and fasciculus cuneatus. Then
And spinothalamic pathway.
spinothalamic pathway, which is further divided into
Lateral and anterior.
anterior and lateral spinothalamic pathway. Then
Spinocerebellar pathway.
spinocerebellar, which is also divided into dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar pathway. So what are these pathway meant for? What is the main function of this dorsal column pathway, or what are the sensations carried by this dorsal column pathway?
Fine touch.
Fine touch, okay, proprioception, stereognosis, vibration, all of them are carried by dorsal column pathway. Then what about the spinothalamic pathway?
Lateral spinothalamic pathway carries the pain and temperature.
Okay, only one of you are speaking. Where are the others? Then what about the anterior spinothalamic?
Crude touch and pressure.
Crude touch and pressure. Then about the dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar pathway, they are meant for a reflex proprioception. Okay, unconscious sensation such as maintaining the posture and all that is responsible of that. Okay, then within the descending tract, so the defined descending tract is also a collection of nerve fibers which has a higher control from the higher center. Okay, which begins from the higher center of the central nervous system, and it influences the motor neuron present within the spinal cord and brainstem. Okay, this is a collection of nerve fibers which begins from the higher center, which begins from the upper motor neuron, and it has control over the lower motor neuron. Then, like the ascending fibers or descending tract also has got contralateral representation, isn't it? Almost all the ascending tract had contralateral representation except that of spinocerebellar pathway. The cerebellum has ipsilateral presentation. While likewise here, in case of this descending tract also, almost all has contralateral representation. Only with few exceptions, almost all has the contralateral representation. And the sensory fibers decussate at the upper end of medulla, forming the sensory decussation. Likewise here, descending fibers decussate at the lower end of medulla, forming the motor decussation, or this decussation of the descending fibers, motor decussation. Okay, and this crossing of these descending fibers also will cross in two different manner. Some of the fiber, almost 80% of the fibers cross, forming this motor decussation at the lower end of medulla oblongata. Okay, while remaining 20%, they just descend down without decussation, and finally they decussate at the level of spinal cord only. Okay, so only 20% of such fibers decussate at the level of spinal cord, but almost 80% or more than 80% of the fibers decussate at the lower end of medulla, forming the motor decussation. And both of these fibers finally has a common final common pathway, which begins from the anterior or ventral horn of the gray matter of spinal cord to form the to rely on the peripheral organ or target organ. Okay, so this is about the general concept about descending pathway. So here we have talked about the upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. So what actually is this upper motor and lower motor neuron is? Upper motor neuron are the nuclei or neurons which are present within the higher center of the brain, mostly or mainly in the cerebrum. Okay, while the lower motor neurons are present in the ventral horn of spinal cord, plus some nuclei within the brainstem are also considered as the lower motor neuron. Okay, so upper motor neuron are the neuron which are present with the higher center, mainly in the cerebral cortex, and lower motor neuron may be in the are mainly in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and sometimes this brainstem also. Okay, nuclei present within the brainstem. So this is about the upper and lower motor neuron, and this thing we should know because we should be clear about the effect of lesion that happens in upper and lower motor neuron. What is the consequence of lesion in upper motor neuron? What will be the consequence of lesion in lower motor neuron? That is important for you people and most commonly asked question. Okay, so this will be the assignment for you people to find out the difference between upper and lower motor neural lesion, effect of upper and lower motor neural lesion. Okay, and then traditionally descending tract is divided into pyramidal and extrapyramidal system. Okay, so it has been traditionally divided into pyramidal extrapyramidal system. Pyramidal system is considered as direct or voluntary pathway. All the voluntary motions or all the voluntary movements, motor actions are mainly controlled by this pyramidal tract. Okay, which include the corticospinal tract. Rest of the all descending tract are mainly concerned with the postural maintenance and balance, equilibrium and balance maintenance. Okay, so such type of pathway are known as extrapyramidal pathway, or we can to have general concept, pyramidal pathway are concerned with the voluntary movement and extrapyramidal pathway are for postural maintenance and equilibrium maintenance. Okay, so within pyramidal pathway, we have only one pathway, that is corticospinal part. Extrapyramidal has numbers of pathway: rubrospinal, tectospinal, vestibulospinal, olivospinal, reticulospinal, and even more pathway are being discovered recently, or let's say are on the way to discovery. So from higher center, this descending pathway descends down through the brainstem and up to the spinal cord to the effector organ. Okay, so that's why it is also known as motor or efferent pathway, while sensory pathway or ascending pathway is also known as sensory or offerent pathway, which carry impulse from the peripheral organ to higher center. Now the stimulus or the effect impulse from the higher center to the peripheral organ is carried by this motor pathway, so it is known as efferent pathway. Okay, now let's start with the pyramidal system. The pyramidal system, which mainly include the corticospinal pathway, originates in the pyramidal neuron in the motor area of the cerebrum. So when we study about cerebrum, there we can see numbers of sulcus and gyrus. Okay, and within the gyrus we have got this motor area, sensory area, visual area, then area for taste sensation, area for auditory sensation. So we have particular functional area that will be more clear when we study about the cerebrum. For now, you have concept. There is motor area, sensory area. Okay, so motor area consists of large pyramidal neurons. Pyramid-shaped neurons are there. So exactly from that pyramidal neurons, this pyramidal system of the corticospinal fibers are originating. Okay, origin is from the pyramidal neurons in motor area, and even partly few fibers arises even from the sensory area of the cerebrum. Okay, this is about the origin of pyramidal system. Then impulse are sent through the corticospinal tract and corticobulbar tract. This is same thing, but the relay station, just because the relay station is different, they are named differently. Okay, corticospinal tract, so name itself is suggesting from the nuclei in the cortex of cerebrum to the spinal cord, ventral horn of the spinal cord, to the anterior horn of the spinal cord. Okay, so this is known as corticospinal tract. But here the next is corticobulbar tract, where it begins from the cortex or from the pyramidal neuron of the cerebrum to the cranial nerve nuclei, which is present within the brainstem. Okay, so there are 12 pairs of cranial nerve. Okay, and almost all of these cranial nerve nuclei are present within the brainstem. So the fibers which descend down up to this cranial nerve nuclei forms the corticobulbar tract. Okay, don't get confused within this corticospinal corticobulbar tract. Function wise and their origin, everything is same, but just as the release station are different, they are named differently. Corticospinal, which relay into the anterior horn of the spinal cord, and corticobulbar, which relay into the cranial nerve nuclei present within the brainstem. Clear? Then the function of this pyramidal system is, as we have already mentioned, it is the motor system or voluntary controlling system. Okay, so it activates skeletal muscle regulating fast and fine movement, both fast and fine movement. Okay, crude and fine movement, both of them are controlled by this. All the voluntary movements are controlled by this pyramidal system, corticospinal tract. Now to show different corticospinal tract. So this is the, suppose this is representing the large pyramidal nuclei present within the cerebral cortex. Okay, this is the left cerebral hemisphere and this is right cerebral hemisphere. This is the Okay, right cerebral and left cerebral hemisphere. So from the pyramidal neuron present within the cerebral cortex, the descending or axon of this neuron descend down. Okay, so first let's trace this one. It descend down right up to the spinal cord, and then it crosses to relay into the anterior horn of the opposite half of spinal cord. So the crossing here is at the level of spinal cord. Okay, and during this descending process, this axon passes through the anterior or ventral white column or anterior funiculus. Okay, that's why it is known as anterior corticospinal tract, and such type of fibers comprises only about 20% in total. Okay, so anterior corticospinal tract comprises only about 20%, while most of the fibers, about 80% of the fibers here, what happened to this? They descend down and crosses at the lower end of medulla oblongata, forming the motor decussation, and descend down to relay in the anterior horn of the same side spinal cord after crossing. Okay, so this fibers which crosses at the level of medulla oblongata, it comprises lateral corticospinal tract as it descends down through the lateral white column. Okay, you remember the white column is divided by this. This is the ventral horn, this is dorsal horn. So this ventral and dorsal horn of gray matter of spinal cord divide this peripheral white matter into anterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, and posterior funiculus. So this anterior corticospinal tract descend through the anterior funiculus, lateral corticospinal tract descend through the lateral funiculus. So they are named accordingly. Okay, lateral corticospinal tract and anterior corticospinal tract. Still, the third type of action here from the pyramidal cells descend down up to the brainstem. So these are the parts showing midbrain pons and medulla oblongata. Part of brainstem right from above downward is midbrain pons and medulla oblongata. Okay, so the brainstem nuclei or the cranial nerve nuclei are dispersed within all this brainstem. So if it relates within the cranial nerve nuclei, this is known as corticobulbar tract. Are you people clear up to this point? Are you people clear up to this point?
Yes, ma'am.
We are studying about the descending tract, and within the descending tract also we are studying about the pyramidal system, which consists of corticospinal tract. Okay, so corticospinal is further subdivided into lateral corticospinal tract, anterior corticospinal tract, and corticobulbar tract. So I hope you people are clear about these three subdivision of corticospinal tract, that is descending pyramidal system. So again, the same thing from the nuclei present within the cerebral cortex. This is the corticobulbar as it is relaying within the cranial nerve nuclei in the brainstem. Okay, then these next 5 years where it descends down uncrossed is the anterior corticospinal fibers, and when where it descends down crossing is known as lateral corticospinal tract. Okay, and the area particularly at the medulla oblongata where all these corticospinal tracts are present here, this forms a pyramid, and this area within the medulla oblongata itself is known as pyramid. Okay, it will be more clear when you study about the brainstem. This particular anterior part of the medulla oblongata is known as pyramid, where this corticospinal tract are located, or where these pyramidal fibers are descending from. Now, just to look at the spinal cord, just to look at the corticospinal tract within the spinal cord. So see here, this is the gray matter, peripheral white matter, and can you see this? This is labeled as the lateral corticospinal tract. Okay, so lateral corticospinal tract is present within the lateral white column, while anterior corticospinal tract is present within the anterior white column. Okay, this is the location. This is just to show the location of this corticospinal tract, anterior and lateral corticospinal tract within the transverse section of spinal cord. Okay, then we will go for the extrapyramidal system. Extrapyramidal system consists of numbers of fibers. Okay, to start with rubrospinal. So here also name itself is suggesting rubrospinal tract. Rubrospinal tract begins from the red nucleus present within the midbrain. Okay, this is transverse section through the midbrain, and this particular nuclei present within the midbrain is known as red nucleus, from where this cerebrospinal tract begins. Okay, so originate from the red nucleus in midbrain. Then here we can see whether the fiber is crossing or uncrossed. Is it crossed fiber or uncrossed fiber? You look at the diagram. Here, this is central canal through the spinal cord, which represents the midline of the body. Okay, the central canal represents the midline of the body. Here, this is right side of the midbrain. Now, these fibers are crossing the midline to reach the opposite side. Okay, so these fibers are crossed fibers. Okay, the cerebrospinal tract crossed on the opposite side and descend down, and finally it terminates at the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. Okay, it terminates at the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord, and function wise the cerebrospinal tract is supposed to facilitate the flexure muscles. Okay, the flexure muscles of the body are facilitated or excited by this cerebrospinal tract, and thus helps in maintaining the muscle tone. So this excitation of extensor and flexure muscles of the body trunk are responsible for the maintenance of posture of an individual. Okay, so this cerebrospinal tract facilitates the flexure muscles, maintaining the muscle tone. And again, this is to locate the cerebrospinal tract within the transverse section of the spinal cord. So here we can see this level cerebrospinal tract, which is present just anterior to the lateral corticospinal tract. So remember, the cerebrospinal tract is present within the lateral white column in front of the lateral corticospinal tract. This is the location of the cerebrospinal tract within the transverse section of spinal cord. And the next extrapyramidal system is tectospinal tract. Tectospinal, here also name itself is suggesting tectospinal or tectal part of the midbrain. Here on the posterior aspect there is superior inferior colliculi are there in the midbrain. Okay, so this tectospinal tract begins from the superior colliculus. Okay, now these fibers cross the midline. Okay, that's why it constitute the crossed fibers. Crossing here occur, it descends down through the brainstem and reaches up to the spinal cord. Here also the termination side for all the descending tracts are the obviously anterior horn of the spinal cord, or the neuron present within the anterior horn or ventral horn of the gray matter of spinal cord. Okay, so termination here is 17 anterior gray horn. And this tectospinal tract descends down only up to the cervical segment of the spinal cord, not below that. Okay, cervical segment of the spinal cord, and its function is to maintain the head movement in response to visual and auditory stimuli. So when we just sit up calm, if someone calls somebody, then our head automatically moves to the side of that source of sound, isn't it? Or when we like to see something, then our head moves along with our eye. So such head movement in response to visual and auditory stimuli is maintained by this tectospinal tract. Okay, so this is the function of tectospinal tract. It is arising from the superior colliculi of midbrain, and then it gets crossed on the opposite side and relay into the anterior horn of the spinal cord up to the cervical segment. So it maintains the movement of head and neck in response to visual and auditory stimuli. Okay. And again, to look at the tectospinal tract within the transverse section of spinal cord. Okay, so here we can see we have already talked about the lateral corticospinal tract, ventral corticospinal tract, cerebrospinal tract, and this tectospinal tract is present somewhere here within the anterior white column in front of this one anterior corticospinal tract. This is the location of tectospinal tract. Okay. Here I am emphasizing on this thing because you may sometimes be asked in your exam to draw the transverse section of spinal cord showing different ascending and descending tract, or locating different ascending and descending tract within. Okay, so this diagram is very important for you, and you even try to draw it and practice it. The next extrapyramidal system is lateral vestibulospinal tract. Lateral vestibulospinal tract here. Just to look at within this diagram, we can see here this is lateral vestibular nucleus. Okay, lateral vestibular nucleus, which is present within the pontomedullary junction or at the terminal end of the pons. This lateral and medial vestibular vestibular nuclei are present. So lateral vestibular spinal tract begins from the lateral vestibular nucleus, and here we can see the fibers here descend down without crossing. Okay, it begins from the right lateral vestibular nucleus, relays down to the spinal cord, ventral horn of the right half of the ventral horn of the spinal cord of same side. Okay, so we can say it is uncrossed fiber which originate from lateral vestibular nuclei at pontomedullary junction. We have already mentioned, and termination is same thing, anterior gray horn. And this lateral vestibular spinal tract runs through the entire spinal cord, all the cervical segment, thoracic segment, lumbar segment, sacral segment, and coccygeal segment. So all entire spinal cord is it runs through the whole length of the spinal cord. Okay, but previously we have studied like this spinal tract runs only up to the cervical segment of the spinal cord. Okay, so this thing also is important for you to keep in mind. This is about the lateral vestibular nuclei and the lateral vestibular spinal tract, and the function is it facilitates the extensor muscle. Okay, it excites the extensor muscles of the body trunk or the body and maintains the posture, balance, and equilibrium of the body is maintained. The next is, as lateral vestibular spinal cord tract is there, so medial vestibular spinal tract is also there. Okay, medial vestibular spinal tract originates from the medial vestibular nuclei, which is again present at the pontomedullary junction or at the caudal end of the pons. Okay, so lateral vestibular nuclei, and here it is shown. Okay, medial vestibular nuclei is shown here in this part, pontomedullary junction, let's say. So medial vestibular spinal nuclei is the origin site of this medial vestibular spinal tract. Okay, and we can see here this medial vestibular nuclei adjoins arising from this medial vestibular nuclei descends, and it has both bilateral presentation. Otherwise, it has crossed and uncrossed fibers both. Okay, so the fibers here are crossed and uncrossed. Both crossed and uncrossed fibers are present, which constitute the medial vestibular spinal tract. And this medial vestibular spinal tract termination, obviously same thing, terminates into the anterior gray horn. Like the dictive spinal tract, it also terminates, or it also descends down only up to the cervical segment of the spinal cord. But lateral vestibular spinal tract descend through the length of the entire spinal cord. Okay, but this medial vestibular spinal tract descends only up to the cervical segment of the spinal cord, and its function is to facilitate extensor muscles of neck and back. Okay, so as it descends only up to the cervical segment, so it helps in facilitating the extensor muscles of neck. Okay, neck and back muscles are excited. And then next is, okay, still the next extrapyramidal system is lateral reticular spinal tract. Okay, I've skipped this medial reticular spinal tract. So medial reticular spinal tract. And this medial reticular spinal tract arises from the reticular formation of pons. Now we can see here this is pons, okay, midbrain pons and medulla oblongata. From pons, this reticular formation are actually present throughout the brainstem. Okay, so the fibers arising from the reticular formation of pons descend down uncrossed. Can you see in this diagram? It is uncrossed. It is not crossing the midline of the body. Okay, the fibers is uncrossed and relay into the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. And this medial reticular spinal tract also descends only up to the cervical segment. Okay, and function is to maintain the muscle tone and posture. So as we have already mentioned in the first initial slide also, like pyramidal system is responsible for all the voluntary movement, and extra pyramidal system is responsible for maintenance of posture and equilibrium of the body. Okay, so almost all extra pyramidal system has this posture maintenance and maintaining the muscle tone. So here this medial reticular spinal tract also has the function to maintain the muscle tone and posture of the body. This is about the medial reticular spinal tract. It is uncrossed fiber. Okay, the next is lateral reticulospinal tract. So here, lateral reticulospinal tract begins from reticular formation of all three parts of brainstem, all from the midbrain, from the pons, and from the medulla oblongata. Okay, it begins from the reticular formation of midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Now, this lateral reticulospinal tract, what happened here? So here, lateral reticulospinal tract is labeled here. Okay, here also this from the reticular formation of it is showing from the reticular formation of medulla oblongata. Some of the fibers are crossing and some are not crossing. So it comprises both the crossed and uncrossed fiber. Okay, so it has crossed and uncrossed fibers, and termination is in the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord up to the thoracic segment. Function, same thing, muscle tone maintenance and posture maintenance. Okay, this is about the medial and lateral reticulospinal tract. And this is again to look at the reticulospinal tract within the transverse section of spinal cord. So here we can see this is the lateral corticospinal tract. In front of lateral, this is rubrospinal tract. Okay, so here ventral horn of the spinal cord, just medial and lateral to ventral horn of the spinal cord, we can look at this medial reticulospinal tract and lateral reticulospinal tract. Okay, ventral horn, lateral to ventral horn is lateral reticulospinal tract, and medial to ventral horn is medial reticulospinal tract. Then another extrapyramidal system is olivospinal tract. Okay, so this olivospinal tract is supposed to begin from the inferior olivary nucleus of medulla oblongata. Okay, and these fibers are also considered to be uncrossed and terminates into the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. So termination for all the descending tract is same thing. Okay, terminates into the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord, and its function is supposed to be it is supposed to play a role in the reflex proprioceptive movements. Okay, but actually the function of olivospinal tract is still unclear, and even if this tract exists or not is also a doubtful case. Okay, so studies are still going on about this olivospinal tract and its function. So this is about the all extrapyramidal system. And here this picture I have kept just to locate different ascending and descending tract within the transverse section of spinal cord. So here left half of the spinal cord, or this part of the spinal cord, is representing which fibers? Now we are done with both these ascending and descending fibers. Okay, this much about the ascending and descending fibers. So here in this spinal cord, this is the left half of the spinal cord, the S of spinal cord. Okay, so here it is showing which fibers, ascending or descending, as we are done with this. Left half is showing ascending fibers. Okay, because we can see here ascending fibers which we have studied in our last lecture has three major pathway systems. Here dorsal column pathway, spinocerebellar pathway, and spinothalamic pathway. Okay, so any one of you please tell me what is this? This area is representing which fiber or which ascending tract? Which is
fasciculus cuneatus.
Fasciculus cuneatus or fasciculus gracchalis?
Gracchalis.
Sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is fasciculus gracchalis, which lies medial to cuneatus. Okay, so obviously this will be fasciculus cuneatus, and this is fasciculus gracchalis, which comprises the dorsal column pathway. Then what about this light blue color? This one is? What is this?
Fasciculus cuneatus.
This one? No, fasciculus cuneatus is this one. Just lateral to fasciculus gracchalis is fasciculus cuneatus, which is present within the dorsal column, isn't it? Here we are now, we have reached here to the lateral wide column. So within the lateral wide column, what is this system?
Dorsal spinocerebellar.
Okay, and if it is dorsal, then what should be this one?
Ventral spinocerebellar.
Ventral spinocerebellar. Okay, so this is dorsal spinocerebellar and this is ventral spinocerebellar. The next pathway system remaining within this ascending tract is this one. So this piece represent
lateral spinothalamic pathway.
Okay, good. Lateral spinothalamic tract, and here this is the ventral or anterior spinothalamic tract. What about this one? This is showing the tectospinal pathway. Okay, so this is about the ascending pathway. Then the right half of the spinal cord here is showing the descending pathway, which we just now have completed. Okay, so who can level this one? Red color structure, level this.
Lateral
corticospinal.
Okay, lateral corticospinal tract. And obviously the same color structure on the anterior white funiculus is, if it is lateral corticospinal tract, this is
anterior corticospinal tract.
corticospinal tract. Okay, then what about this one? Just ventral to lateral corticospinal tract, which begins from red nucleus of midbrain.
Rubrospinal tract.
Okay, rubrospinal tract. This one is rubrospinal tract. Okay. Then this one. Level the pointed structure.
Tectospinal.
Tectospinal. Okay. Then lateral to that one.
Vestibulospinal.
Vestibulospinal. Okay. So ventral and lateral vestibulospinal tract is present within this part only. And this one.
Olivospinal.
Olivospinal. This is olivospinal tract. Then finally, the remaining part, this one is medial and lateral to anterior horn. Okay, this is reticulospinal. So medial to that is the medial reticulospinal tract, and lateral one is the lateral reticulospinal tract. Okay, so this diagram is very, very important for you people. You should practice this and look at all this ascending and descending tract. Okay. Then we'll go for some applied aspect with this tracks. I have mentioned only few, and the rest of you have to go and study in your textbook. Okay. So one important is Brown-Sequard syndrome. And actually, it is hemisection of the spinal cord. If half part of the spinal cord is lesion, what will be the result? Okay, so such kind of syndrome is known as Brown-Sequard syndrome, and it comprises ipsilateral spastic paralysis. Like if it resembles the lesion of upper motor neuron. Okay, and resulting in ipsilateral spastic paralysis because of the damage of corticospinal tract. Then fine touch and vibration and even the motor weakness on the ipsilateral side because of involvement of dorsal column pathway. Okay, dorsal column pathway involvement results in loss of fine touch and vibration and those proprioceptive sensation, motor weakness on the ipsilateral side, pain and temperature loss on the contralateral side because of the involvement of spinothalamic tract. Okay, so spinothalamic tract involvement results in loss of pain and temperature. So these are different syndrome because of hemisection of the spinal cord. Tabes dorsalis, which is also known as torsalis syphilis. Here, this actually is a disease, rare disease where it occurs slow degeneration, specifically demyelination of the dorsal column pathway. Okay, demyelination of dorsal column pathway, and obviously it results in Romber's signs positive. So Romber's sign, last time we have mentioned what is Romber's sign. What happened in this case? In last lecture we have shown even the pictures when we started about the dorsal column pathway, isn't it? Dorsal column pathway. Okay, this one. As the picture is showing, a person is asked to stand straight with feet straighter and eyes closed. So what happened in case of positive Romber's sign?
Person fall down when he stands with closed eye.
Okay, when stand with closed feet and closed eye, okay, the person may fall off because of lesion within this dorsal column pathway, as he has lost his sense of proprioception, vibration, those the proprioceptive sensation which is carried from this joint and all the Golgi tendon organ. Because of that, he may fall off. Okay, that is the positive lumbar sign. Then after this is assignment for you people. You have to locate the ascending descending tract within the spinal cord. Okay. Then differentiate between upper and lower motor neuron, pyramidal and extrapyramidal system. Okay. So you need to do this assignment, and I think I will talk with Dr. Ministers that how to get your assignment from this Microsoft team. Okay, but you people just do your homework to about these 3 questions. Okay, you have to submit it either from this if possible from this Microsoft team, otherwise you can mail me personally into my personal mail ID. Okay, about this assignment submission we'll talk later. For now, you should be doing this assignment. Okay, so this much for today. Any confusion?